Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Woo-hoo.
Hello, welcome to Conversations with SOTU. I'm Adrian Metcalf,
And I'm Josh Schwartzbeck.
and this is Dr. Steve Schatz, local author, the Adima Chronicles. You can find him at stevewrites.com. And Josh is a professional medium. He channels the consciousness we call SOTU. And we're having an ongoing conversation with SOTU, which we'll pick up in just a moment, with Steve interviewing with questions for SOTU. So we hope you enjoy it. Last week we dropped off with a whole discussion about negative ego. Dun, dun, dun. So we may start up there again this week, but maybe not right away. All right, hope you enjoy. Shall we go?
Here we go. Right. Well, we went out for a coffee break.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Well, let's start off with an easy one. Can anyone channel?
Can anyone channel? Yes. The thing about it is that unless you are clear emotionally, then the dynamics of those things that you believe and those things that you feel are going to come through as a reflection of your channeling. In other words, the channel always colors the information. You said a few weeks ago that we're very American-centric. We are, because we come through a channel that is very American-centric in that sort of way. We cannot speak, well, we could, but we do not speak a foreign language because it would scramble his brain too much because he believes that he cannot speak a foreign language. Although when we were in Germany a number of years ago, everyone did not speak English, and yet they all seemed to understand us.
So, how can, when I write, there are times that I get to a difficult plot point, and I turn it over in my head
Yes.
and just start to type.
Yes,
And so it seems like that's channeling.
it is. Singing and losing oneself in one's singing. Playing a musical instrument and losing oneself in one's music. Writing, painting, any sort of way, any sort of dynamic. When you lose that dynamic of self, and there's a natural flow that is going on, and you're done. When you're done with it, or when you have come back to a certain level of cognizance, you go, "Ooh," because of the dynamic that you have created. This is opening yourself to that dynamic of the creativity that's always coming through anyway.
But isn't there a danger to take oneself too seriously at that point?
No, universe has way more things up their sleeve for you than to allow that to happen too much, unless you are here to experience that dynamic of ego and the crash and burn that would set you up for.
Yeah, the people say, "Oh, I'm channeling the great Poobah, and what you must do is."
No, some people do that.
There
You won't
are a
find
lot of
us doing that.
No, but there are. I've seen a lot of channels who.
Well, that's why we're not successful in that wealthy sort of way that you talk about, because we're not here to manipulate people, although we have been accused of that now and again. We are just masterful in our, what shall we say, what we can evoke from you.
Yes.
I see. So is there a way to tell? Is there a way for someone who is not channeling to know whether it's
Why is it important?
BS or not?
Well, again, it's that whole dynamic of, well, does the truth ring with you? You know, trust yourself. What do you does? You know, why you? This is session 8. Why have you come back 8 times? Is it because you wish to be a star? Is it because of the huge audience that we have?
It's
is
the
it the
millions
dynamic?
of cards
Does
and
your
letters.
ego really need this? Well, but you can answer the question yourself. Do you find it interesting? Do you find this stuff, you know, do you have to stop and let it sink in for a week or so before you understand what we're saying? Or do we speak a dynamic that speaks to the truth, that speaks to a dynamic of resonance, of it leads to a dynamic of emotion within self that says, oh, wow, this energy is putting into words what I have already always known. The thing about it is that there are repercussions for certain actions that you wish to in your world. You have forgotten about the dynamic of truth. You have forgotten about the dynamics of integrity. You have forgotten about the dynamics of really loving and caring for each other because you believe there's not enough and somebody's going to take something from you. There's not enough love, there's not enough money, there's not enough food, there's not enough this, there's not enough that. In the year 2000, we remind you again, you were producing enough food on a daily basis to feed 9 billion people. People are going hungry because food is a commodity, not a right.
So how come a lot of people who are channels and spiritualists, etc., seem to at some point veer off the sidelines and just lose it?
Well, usually it's the dynamic of what people put upon them. It is a dynamic of their doing the work without completely healing themselves. They're using the work as a replacement for self. They're using the dynamic of being a this one. You know, why did the Channel and Adrian move away from the dynamic of a metaphysical store where they were basically had the opportunity to do this kind of work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and move to a farm and move away from people? Because the channel, after so many years of doing it and having held the expectations of so many people, because that's the dynamic, they put the channel on a pedestal. And unless the channel has enough cognizance, enough awareness of that, eventually it pollutes the dynamic of the clarity of the energy, because they forget that it's really not them, they are just the vehicle.
Okay.
Right?
Because
their clients, because people that work with them generally find it difficult to make the separation. And eventually you just get tired of saying, no, that's not me.
And Josh has gone through he did the circuit and had large numbers of people, yes?
Yes.
Just got old.
But he was never really willing to charge $1 million for it or write a book. Or, well, you know, he has often told you he doesn't feel like he's a writer. Mm-hmm. He feels like that what he does and what he does well is this. And we would agree with him.
Do you get the feeling that there's kickback, i.e., if you're trying to push your energy in a direction that is helpful, that's a good thing, and if you're trying to increase fear or power or something like that,
Karma, you mean?
Yeah, like
Is there
karma.
karma?
Yeah.
Yes, there is karma. It's not instant. Sometimes you have to build it up. For example, we would say in the next incarnation, someone like Dick Cheney is going to be barefoot and poor, and have absolutely no power in their lives because they have very third world. We see very third world, very, living in rags, sort of existence. Hand to mouth. Why? Well, it's going to balance the dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it going to be his next incarnation? Not necessarily.
You speak of reincarnation.
Yes, we do.
Do we have, are they linear? Do we have memories of past lives?
You can. And in fact, it's not linear. They're all happening simultaneously, but
Let's
that's
not
just
confuse me there.
that's just a little too much for most minds to handle.
Yes. How come there's so many Cleopatras then?
Well, it's not that there's so many Cleopatras. Again, it's a dynamic of identification and ego. What it does is it represents, we've had a few Bernadettes too, in the dynamic. Well, if your highest, if your ideal, and usually it's a dynamic, it's a stage of growth. If you develop a dynamic of that sort of ideal in and you wish to be that way, then you're going to emotionally resonate with that energy. Why? Because that energy has existed and will exist on a continuing basis through many people's lifetimes. Many people will choose to have a martyred or a holy or a miraculous, at least one incarnation in a lifetime. So you're going to get a lot of dynamics of repetition. So if you resonate with, if you're a loving, caring person and you resonate with the type of energy that that person exhibited, then why not use that template?
Okay.
It's a template.
Okay. Can we come back as plants or animals or
You
things?
can, but you generally do not.
Usually we're
Yeah, you
stuck in
usually
the
are going
same-
for the
Yeah.
next level. But again, we say you can get to a point of consciousness where you are at the right hand of the divine, and say, I think I'd like to come back as a
tick.
a candy dancer. Well, I've never had that experience, so I think I'd like to try that.
And a lot of people who
Taxi dancer, that's what they call it.
taxi dancer, yes, feel that you do reincarnation until you get to enlightenment and then you stop. Your feeling?
Very linear.
Okay. So we just kind of keep going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you take a dynamic where you'll rest in between lifetimes. Again, it's out of time and space, so who's to say?
Okay. Well, here's one that I think might be kind of big and might leak into the negative ego. So I looked up at the clock, and we have plenty of time for it. What happens when we die? When I die.
Which part?
All of them. I mean, I
Well-
assume the meat suit just rots. But
Oh, yeah. Well, you're not attached to the body any longer. And in fact, what happens is a dynamic begins a journey in the non-physical. You do not stop growing. You do not stop having experiences. They are just non-physical experiences. You are connected to the physical mentally, emotionally, because there is a mental, emotional dynamic that occurs there, but very tenuously. More you are involved in the dynamic of being thrilled at not having the encumbrance of a physical body. and the amount of exploration and awareness of consciousness that can come from that side of the dynamic. But what generally happens in the dynamic of a lifetime, you die, you are met by, you either go into the light where you are met by familiar energies that you recognize, families, family members that you may have loved, but it's going to be generally someone or someones that you have loved and trusted. And they are going to, and now that's not to say that if you die in fear or you die with the terror of being judged by the divine because you lived such an imperfect lifetime, then the truth of the matter is that you're going to experience that fear because you need to be able to purge that in order to move beyond. So you're going to find, let's say you believe in Satan and you believe you have been imperfect and you are going to go to hell, and you're going to find yourself standing on the edge of the abyss looking into that molten lava and that flame and that fear, and you're going to feel that terror until your higher self or your guide taps you on the shoulder and says, by the way, none of that is real. And emotionally, energetically, they're going to take you to a place of healing where you're going to do a retrospective of the just ended lifetime. And you're going to, in a very rational and very understandable way, see what you have accomplished and what you have not accomplished. What you set out as a goal for yourself in the beginning and what you have managed to achieve in that dynamic of success. All right? And you're going to begin to make a plan for either moving on and being non-physical for a while, or making plans to reincarnate in order to, what shall we say, make up for some of the things that you didn't get to do, that you didn't accomplish in the last lifetime. In other words, you get to keep doing it until you accomplish what you wish. Or wait for it. You wish for it, we have to give it all to you.
All right.
Right? Now, you have often heard us say that just because you're dead doesn't necessarily mean you're any smarter than you were when you were alive. And so, and another thing that you forget when you are non-physical is a very important thing: pain. You forget about what pain is. There's no experience of pain in the non-physical. And so pain becomes an abstract. And so a lot of times you'll say, well, I really wish to learn about love. And so a situation where your mother is not a loving person, but your father is, and everyone else around you are living people, might have given you that dynamic of that experience of that loss of love, that motivation to be able to learn the dynamic of love in the upcoming lifetime. But instead, you'll give yourself an abusive mother, a sexual abusive father, a brother or a sister that beats the heck out of you all the time. In other words, you often give yourself mountains to climb when a molehill would have done. All right, so that's often the level, because, you know, the desire from the non-physical, that desire to be more, that desire to grow, is very strong.
Mm. But we don't dissipate and join with other little bits of other people?
You can.
Okay.
But you had that experience in the garden. Why would you go back to that?
I see.
Now you're moving on to a third experience, okay? And we describe it as you had the garden experience of collective consciousness. Mm-hmm. You have moved to a dynamic of an individual relationship, a sacred I am, we call it, an individual relationship with all that is. And now from that dynamic of that hard-won, hard-fought individuality, it's time to reach out and reconnect to each other again. But this time, not from that dynamic of that collective awareness, but from the dynamic of choice. And that is why we describe this movement as a movement of transformation, not evolution, because it is a conscious dynamic, not an unconscious one.
Okay. Tell me about the negative ego.
Well, again, we go back to the dynamic of that moment of separation, don't we? And that dynamic of separation where look at what's going on in your world right now. Everything that's going on is a battle of the sexes. You do understand that. It's a battle of the masculine against the feminine in many sorts of ways. And that dynamic happened at the separation. And that dynamic between the negativity that goes on between the masculine and the feminine, the games that go on between the masculine and the feminine came from that moment of separation, because negative ego, all of a sudden, that little piece of self that used to rely on the collective was now totally responsible for reality creation.
Say it again.
That piece of self, all of a sudden there was a piece of self, and the piece of self was in charge. The collective was not making the choices anymore. You had to. The fruit was not manifesting on the trees. You had to learn to farm. You had to learn to hunt. You had to learn to survive in the dynamic of the world. You had to take responsibility, individual responsibility for your own survival. And the masculine was pissed. Oh, excuse us, angry.
Why?
Because all of a sudden this collective dynamic was broken, and you didn't know what was going to happen, and the feminine blamed itself. Remember? The feminine, the more creative, the piece of self that wanted to grow more and more and more. And the masculine blamed the feminine and said, we're never going to allow you to have that sort of choice again until you are wise enough to use it. And the feminine said, you're right. And if you look at that's going to start a war. But if you look at the dynamic of the history of your species, you have moved from the dynamic of the collective, that dynamic of survival, where the female had to raise the children. And the masculine had to go out and provide for that family unit in order for your species to survive. So those roles were put into place and were reinforced by the dynamic of survival, of having to survive. All of that, all the wars, all of the movement through that has been movements into individuation, movements more into a place where you have lost the dynamic of the collective awareness and gain the awareness of the individual. Now, from that place of individuality, reaching out and reconnecting, in other words, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, thought, word, and feeling, putting yourself on the same page, choosing to put yourself on the same page as others without losing one iota of that individual nature, and you will solve each and every problem that exists in your world. How's that for a sweeping statement?
It's pretty sweeping.
Now, negative ego is that piece of self that wishes to keep you from growing. And you can always recognize the dynamic of negative ego because it uses the dynamic of thought in conjunction with an old feeling. Okay? Adrian?
You'll have an experience.
We just threw that at her.
No, you'll have an experience to meet somebody, and something in their behavior, part of you will read through an old frame, an old picture, an old experience that was painful, and you don't see the situation or them clearly. And it will have you have those old feelings again of she's going to do that or he's going to do that, and it's going to get this and this is it's all going to blow up, and therefore you stop living in the moment and what's really going on.
And negative ego is always telling you about yourself or someone else. And it's either doing a better than, you're better than someone else, or you're less than them. And what seems to validate that dynamic is the old childhood feelings of not enough, or the old adolescent feelings of anger and rage. So it seems as if the dynamic is real because you have the thought and you have the feeling. And if you begin to put that dynamic into word, you can actually begin to create that reality.
But isn't that sometimes it's something that you've learned that, oh, this is this kind of a person? And that
Well, sometimes
turns
you're
out to be
right,
the
but
truth.
sometimes you're wrong. In other words, if you generalize too much, you are not dealing with the individual dynamic. Sometimes, remember we talked about the dynamic of Are You Sure? Go back to the, we think two shows ago, and consider the dynamic of the Are You Sures that happened. Again, you must realize you're on a journey, and that journey is constantly moving, and you're constantly being given the opportunities to be more, to grow.
Right. So if you said, every time I fall in love, it's with a bad boy, and then you say, I don't want that,
we would
and
say
then
to
the
you
gorgeous
that
one
every time
rides
you have fallen in love before, it has been with the bad one, right? But this time, I'm going to go outside of my old habits, and as you have said, you went outside your old habits and you found someone that you could really care for. But it was a heck of a lot more work than the one that was going to lead you to crash and burn.
Right. But if and then the Are You Sure is when a gorgeous hunka rides up on a motorcycle. Now, doesn't that kind of contradict what you were
Not
just saying?
necessarily.
We do need to wrap
Because-
it up.
Say it again.
Just telling you both we need to wrap it up here. So
Oh, a minute and 33 seconds. With the hunka on the motorcycle.
We got a
one more
hunka
time.
on the motorcycle that we're supposed to throw away?
Let's put it this way. And you're involved in a relationship with someone else, and
Yes,
the
or no.
hunka drives up, and the old piece of yourself says, well, can
Whoa.
I go with the hunka and not lie about it? Integrity. Integrity. Damn it. It'll solve everything. Right? It doesn't matter what you do, just don't lie about it. All right, dear ones, we love you all so very, very much. Until next time we close, sending you peace, sending you happiness, sending you joy. We don't think that they started the clock exactly right, did they?
well, we're close
All
enough.
right, we probably meet 35, 40 minutes already. Bye-bye. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. We think we're going to do this again.
Thank you for watching Conversations with SOTU. We'll see you next time. Go to our website if you'd like to find out more.
You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday